And so let me very quickly introduce you the panel members that we have here on board to open up that discussion here. So we first will have Mary Lovely, who is a very nice name. She's a okay, got it. Yeah. So Mary Lovely is a professor in economics, specializing on trade and political economy here at the Syracuse University. But she's also a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute. She has done a lot of research herself on US and China trade flows and policy here, but is also very closely from the DC scene, watching and advising, trying to advise the political level in the US here. She's also a co-editor of the China Economic Review here, was a co-editor here. So I think she's really very good to set the scene, the more micro trade scene here, in which science will have to operate here. So then we will also have Philippe Aghion. I don't think I have to introduce you. Philippe is, and also why you're a very important part of this panel here, because you already presented your research yesterday or the day before. But of course, Philippe will also is very much also engaged in trying to assess the effects of not only science, but also competition policy, other areas here, how that and subsidies, how that would affect actually this geopolitical tensions here, and he will also be able to offer a European perspective on this here. And then we have Richard Freeman, who again, I think there's no explanation here for you guys why he's a good member of this panel here. He has very extensively worked on what the impacts is of US-China on individual researchers and how they do research here, also using his labor perspectives here on this. So again, a very important expertise that we can bring on board here. And then finally, we're also very lucky through Richard to have Xueling. Yeah, I hope I pronounce your name correct here. She's our Chinese representative in this panel here. So she came to the US to work as a postdoc with Richard here a couple of years ago. She's now still working with Richard on related science collaboration topics here, but she's also, she returned to China here, and she's also helping to recruit Chinese students here to come to the US here. So her experience from a personal perspective of how she perceives this geopolitical tensions will also be very much appreciated. So I think you understand how happy I am with this panel here. So I'm very much looking forward and giving first the floor then to Mary to set the scene of these geopolitical tensions and what implications that might have for your science. Mary, the floor is yours. Yes. Yes, because we are on YouTube and also on Zoom, and if you don't use the mic, nobody hears you outside this room. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's interesting to think about one's own life in terms of kind of the sweep of history. I know that sounds kind of grandiose, but when I look at my own career, I realize how deeply tied it was to changes in US-China relations. I started out as basically doing public economics, then moved to trade, which I adored, and then decided, based on an invitation to join a project, on whether multinationals were being drawn to low environmental standard locations. I got into a project with the World Bank on China. And of course, from there, I just kept working on China and was fortunate to be able to have access to incredible amounts of data through both my graduate students, through purchases of data, and through sharing with friends and colleagues, including what most of you might be familiar with, which is the large firm level census that we have had access to. Chinese census customs records, sorry. And of course, all the administrative data that China produces through its yearbooks. So just enormous amounts of data that have had, a beneficial impact on cohorts of graduate students as well as many faculty. And there are just oodles and papers that have been written about that. Around that time, the NBER started with a China working group, which then turned into just a China group. And it was here at the NBER that I was actually asked to join the editorial board for the China Economic Review, where I became a co-author and handled I would say about over the course of the time I was there, 250 to 300 manuscripts. And at that time, we were working very hard to get more Chinese-based review referees and Chinese editors, co-editors. So I stopped doing that in 2015. I'm not doing it anymore. Someone else is doing it, as everyone who's done anything like that knows. It's strictly a labor of love. And then went to Washington right around the time for a sabbatical, which I thought would be restful, but turned out it wasn't because President Trump launched a trade war. And the next thing I knew, I was deeply in the midst of a lot of stuff. And part of that is because I am A, a Democrat, and B, strongly pro-trade and pro-international investment and international exchange, which has led me to have some awkward moments at dinner parties. Let me just say that. It's so I'm going to talk about the environment, particularly through a US lens, because that's the lens that I know best. I do have, as you all know, I have many European colleagues at the Peterson Institute, and I'm very much looking forward to the presentations to follow. I might be a little scarred because yesterday I had a test. I was called to be part of a debate on the, if you may not know, the House Select Committee on the CCP, which is a very antagonistic, let's say, toward US-China relations. So my job was to argue in favor of not revoking permanent normal trade relations with China and not imposing further export controls beyond what's necessary for national security, and not arguing for more outward investment restrictions. This committee is not just a Republican-led effort to get a lot of airtime, although it is that. It is also a bipartisan committee. So there are many on both sides of the aisle who wish to see us decouple. I will use the forbidden word, decouple further from China. So the atmosphere in Washington is, I would say, deeply into the narrative that China poses overwhelming risks for the US, and engagement with China poses overwhelming risks. You could say I'm too close and therefore exaggerating, but I really don't think I am. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means for scientific inquiry, which is, of course, dedicated to truthfully representing what one finds and openly and transparently presenting how one arrives at those conclusions. Mm-hmm. So just for the state of US-China relations, and this is just the environment in which we work as science and science funders, there's a deep, deep, deep distrust on both sides of others' motives and actions. I think there's deliberate manipulation of interpretations of others' motives and actions. For example, if you do look at any of the tweets that were put out yesterday by the Select Committee, the one they chose for me, I think, was highly skewed in one direction. So is it deliberate interpretation? We could argue about it, but I think it's clear the direction of travel. Intensive surveillance of all interactions of scholars. I think we have to be aware that we are being surveilled, frankly. I don't think I do a lot of track 2 dialogues through CSIS. Also, we at Peterson have a ongoing relationship with a think tank in China. We never think that those interactions are not surveilled. So I think that one has to just operate that way and say, you're just, and we would always anyway, just do things that we think if they were brought to light, we would be proud of them, right? And I also think there's just domestic pressure on both US and Chinese scholars to conform to the dominant narrative of the malevolent motives of the other. And this is, I think, the most important point, that we're under pressure. Now you might say, well, what does that mean? That's not hard to resist. Let me tell you, I recently wrote a piece that was critical of US trade policy, particularly with regard to the violation of what I think are obligations that the US has under the WTO. And with a very liberal editor in a policy-related journal, not an academic journal, I was asked, why wasn't I defending Biden's industrial policy? Well, I said, because I'm not an expert in industrial policy, and this is not a piece about industrial policy. So I think that there is this pressure to conform, even in, people say, yes, they can see that in China, but it's true here also. I think we have to be honest about that. Now, the implications for scientists. Let me skip to, and hopefully some of these other ideas will come up in the discussion. I think that we are working in an environment that stresses national achievement and national security. I think it certainly must impact on the hard sciences, but I think it also impacts on social sciences. What are the topics that people are allowed to discuss? What do journals think are interesting? There is reduced opportunity for open exchange with counterparts, pressure to view achievements of others as invalid or tainted, reduced access to funding for travel, joint projects, or cooperation, suspicion of expats working in our country, better funding for competitive research that prioritizes domestic narratives rather than what one might think is the natural arc of one's own research, and reduced access clearly to cross-border data. Some of you may know of a service called WIND that provides access to basic underlying Chinese statistics, and many think tanks already have had their subscriptions not renewed. We're waiting. It's important data, it's publicly available data, but you can imagine that the kind of research that I did and my graduate students did 10 years ago just simply will not be available to students moving forward. I don't know about the natural sciences. I hope that we will hear more about that. Just unique pressures on social sciences, because I am a social science. One, surveillance, don't think it's only for the natural sciences, it isn't. There's a pressure to reinforce dominant narratives and the choice of topic and findings. And I think with the new counter-espionage law in China, I think we have to recognize that some of our colleagues may risk espionage charges if they share data. So what does that mean, I think, for funders and editors? And I'll conclude. I think for US editors, it's really, really a hard job. How do you find good referees for papers on that use data from China? The referee has to understand the Chinese context, but it can't be partisan in the sense of not really thinking about why was this topic chosen, and is this, are the findings really valid, I guess. Don't just focus on method alone. Think about the topic choice, the framing, and also data collection, because I can tell you that is really where the rubber hits the road. What do we do about data access and replication when we have a counter-espionage law that makes it difficult for data to be shared across borders? And I think, yeah, despite all that, editors have to work hard to keep the door open to Chinese scholarship, Chinese topics, Chinese views, Chinese interests, Chinese students who want to work here and beyond. For funders, I think they need to look beyond the current political whims. In Washington right now, if you want to write a paper that's saying that late trade is bad because it hollowed out American manufacturing, you will be funded quite fully. If you think that actually the effect of trade on labor is very much over exaggerated, then, well, yeah, let's hope you have your own money, kid. Let's hope you inherited a lot. I think the funders need to insist on broad surveys of the field of study. Have researchers really considered discoveries and findings developed outside the United States? I think they shouldn't reward nationalist rhetoric. It is so easy to do. I have had so many pieces, op-ed pieces, blog pieces, where editors have rewritten the lead in ways that clearly head toward this nationalist rhetoric because that's what gets clicks. And finally, I think we need to continue to fund cross-border projects, as difficult as it is.
Okay, thanks for making us so optimistic. But just at a time where we need more academic research on really identifying the costs and benefits of these choices, and we need more data in order to be able to do that, that's exactly the constraint that we are facing here. But thanks to very courageous researchers that we still have, like you, that we hope we can continue. Philippe, you will be able to use data to identify what the actual costs are on science here. So floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. So should we fear China? So there are, in fact, on China, there are two coexisting views. I mean, one view is that China will soon overtake us, okay? And it's just a matter of, I don't know, decades or less. And that's one view. Another view is that with the current institutions that they have, China will not make it. I call that the one nation fails view. That in fact China is doomed because they are not democratic. They don't have good institutions that favor innovation, and so they are bound to not be able to fall into what you could call a middle income trap and not be able to either catch up or let alone leapfrog us. Okay, and so now question is China research catching up with the US? That's and how much does Chinese research owe to the US? So that's the first kind of question that we ask. And very much what I will talk about is based on research, joint work with Luc and Raphael and David Stromberg and other co-authors, which we presented indeed 2 days ago. But I will talk about, I will broaden beyond that. So first, I mean, if you look in terms of patents, there is clearly in terms of number of patents, more than a catch-up of China vis-a-vis US. Of course, they are not all fantastic patents. If you look at triadic patents or other metrics of good patenting, US is still ahead of China, well ahead. But still, there is a trend towards catching up. Also, the work from Antonin Bergeau and his colleagues that he has been presenting for several years now and shows that, if you take particular technologies and you look at the relative contribution of China to this, China is in blue. And you see that there is a collapse of Japan and the rise of China in particular, and US is kind of and Europe is kind of well, anyway, it's not. It depends. But China, you can see the rise of China and the collapse and the decline of Japan. So that's kind of telling. And now you can look at papers. So if you look in terms of number of publications. China is in, and that comes from, so that comes from the work we did on using Scopus data. But you see first that there is a kind of catching up of China catches up with, even goes beyond US and catches up with Europe in terms of number. And in terms also of number of top cited. And of course, the problem is that who cites, okay? And so you have the feeling that China is doing much better than the one nation state view would tell you. That's for sure. The question is that are they overtaking us? So and there is an element of what I could call optimism on our side, is that in fact the Chinese research relied to a large extent on collaborations with US. You can see that the green curve is the number of top cited papers, Chinese cited papers, and you see that there you have the catch up. But if you restrict now attention to those without a US co-author or someone based in the US, you see it falls from there to there, and so you can see that it makes a big difference. If you take out US co-authors, then you slow down the catching up process considerably. This shows the share of publications of Chinese researchers with European versus US co-authors. You see that there is a continuous increase in the collaborations with Europeans, but in the US it was a sharp rise, and then you had the China initiative, and I will say a few more words that in fact reverted the trend. Okay, so since this initiative was implemented, you have a sharp decline in the share of Chinese publication with US co-authors. So what the China initiative was, it was something launched under Trump to fight presumably Chinese economic espionage. It would mean more complicated administrative procedure, reduce access to funding, exclusion of targeted researchers. And so what we did in the paper is to look at the China initiative implementation as a quasi-natural experiment and look at its impact on the volume, quality, and direction of Chinese research. I want to summarize because I want to repeat. The thing is that essentially what we found is that there was a negative but non-significant effect on publications, but a negative and significant effect on citation, on the number of Chinese publications in top 5% journal, and on the average H index of co-authors for those Chinese researchers that used to have strong links with US coasters prior to the shock. Compared, and the control group is Chinese researchers who used to have strong links with European researchers prior to the shock. Okay, that's we do a different dip, and that's the result. That's the average. That's the main effect, the ATT regression. Okay, so so you can see that there is a negative effect on the quality of Chinese research of this China initiative. Now you could say, well, but how about the US side? And there you have the work of Aghion and co-authors that shows that you have pretty much similar things happening on the US side. First, the share of papers or publications by Americans with Chinese co-authors went down after the China initiative, mirroring exactly what we saw on the Chinese side. But also you have a negative effect on science. They look at PubMed citations and they find also significantly negative for those researchers that used to have strong, the US researchers that used to have strong with Chinese. The China initiative had a big impact on the quality of subsequent research. So it affected both sides. Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, that's right. Okay, so I have to stay still. It's very hard, a challenge for me, you know. I have to be attached like Ulysse, you know. Okay. Exactly. So now you could say, well, could you compare the effect on the Americans and the effect on that's something we still have to do. But one hint already is that what we show here is that the magnitude of the decline increases with the extent to which the other country dominates in the field. And since there are more fields where the US dominates than fields where China dominates, our presumption, but we are working on this, is to show that the effect is negative on both, but more negative on Chinese research overall than it should be on US research. Okay, so that's the thing. Now that's where we are. Okay, so China, in a nutshell, is not as bad as One Nations Fail would say, but is not as terrible as, you know, this Australian report with the alarming report to say that we are finished, China has won, that the Guardian did a kind of article on that in last March. We are not as bad as the Australian report says, and we are not as threatened by China, and China is doing much better than what One Nations Fail would say. What about the going ahead? Will China take over? Alors, it's true that China spends a lot in R&D. They spend enormous amount, and they have a very, you know, forceful industrial combined with, you know, R&D policy. So that's very good. But there is one thing is that first, there is the kind of, there is Xi Jinping, and the political tightening in China. And for example, this paper by Acemoglu and co-authors, you know, now more and more, you require that head of departments be member of the Communist Party, okay? And what they show is that following appointment of new department heads, you can see the research of other researchers in the lab lining up much more with the research agenda of the head of the department. So they become much more conform. So there is something changing in the fact that, you know, they may be more conforming and less innovative and less like Kuhnian innovation. When you try to do like the boss of your lab, you are less likely to be Kuhnian innovator. That's the idea. There is also something that, you know, misallocation. Typically, firms far below frontier should be doing imitation. Firms beyond a certain threshold should be doing frontier innovation. But there are frictions, and the frictions imply that you are more like this. And when you increase the friction, you go from there to there. And for example, Ziliboti would tell you that compare China and Taiwan, typically, when you are closer to frontier, we know that you have a lower growth rate, okay? And you could compare R&D and non-R&D firms. In Taiwan, you see, because you do more R&D when you are closer to frontier, it makes that frontier firms grow still more than what you could do because they become more innovative, you see? And whereas in China, you see on the left-hand side, you see no difference between R&D intensive and non-R&D intensive firms, which shows that R&D doesn't make a huge difference in China compared to Taiwan. Taiwan, R&D investment is retargeting frontier research firms, thereby, you know, reducing the extent to which they grow less when they are frontier, because they can rely more on innovation. So I think that's interesting because it shows that, you know, there is something to the fact that there are institutional barriers, limited competition, the limited freedom. That's something that, you know, I think is a kind of impediment to becoming fully frontier innovator and Kuhnian innovator. And it's true that to some extent, China could do very well and can do very well because it relied also on collaborations with countries where there is more freedom, like the US. And of course, when you have the China issue. Now I want to just end up, well, how should we act vis-a-vis China? There is one view on that, which is to say, you know, do the Trump kind of policy or exactly the debate that you were mentioning. We should be super tough. And there is more what I call the Kissinger view, if I understood the Kissinger interview to The Economist, to say, well, of course, on the one hand, there is the sensitive technologies where you have to be careful and vigilant. But on the other hand, we won't be able to overcome climate change without China. There are major challenges on demography, on climate, on war in Ukraine, on many, where we need collaboration with China. And we were all relieved when they got out of zero COVID, because zero COVID of China was stalling worldwide growth. And we were all relieved when they got out of it, because they said suddenly we can resume growth. So we had a kind of schizophrenic attitude vis-a-vis China. We were there praying that they would get out of zero COVID, but we said on the other hand, we have to be careful. So we have to come to overcome this schizophrenia and find a good midway. I call that the Kissinger approach, but you can call that differently. And I think, and about Europe, I mean, something, and my end word is that though, what we show is that researchers, the treated Chinese researchers, those who used to collaborate a lot with US, after the Chinese, they collaborate well with US co-authors, and we have good reason to believe that they reallocate partly to European co-authors. So Europe, in a sense, could take advantage if you have this kind of very tough policies of US vis-a-vis China. Of course, it may be an opportunity for Europe to say, well, you know, we can partly at least benefit from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's really a challenge for the mic to.
No, but I will. That's right.
But I think it was really also a very good view on how we see already the effects of the trends with China in macro effects here, and which will likely to be continuing with what we have seen from Mary, what she was discussing here. But also, I think very good point to make that we should perhaps also really not be so afraid here is that we should actually be less schizophrenic, but still realistic. That's my purpose. Yeah, but vigilant. Yeah, and Europe. Yeah, we'll see what. Yeah. So with Richard, we will be going even more zooming in at the micro level, at the researchers, what kind of mechanisms actually at the micro level, at the level of institutions would actually play out, and how that affects actually the more macro. So this will be the micro picture to the macro results here. So Richard's floor is yours. And
okay, I'm going to talk about not just micro, but a totally different, right, I think more important place where the US and China are partners connecting together. And that is background, it's implicit in all of Pierre's things as well. Percent of world papers as countries, the US and China are the two biggest, but it's important for the Americans to understand that China is, and just in the last 3-4 years, has become by far the biggest. They surpassed us. If you put all the EU together, the EU is, and that you saw that in his slide, is bigger in that sense. But China will surpass the EU shortly. There's a huge change in the world. The US and China are by far each other's greatest research partners. That's being measured by collaborative papers. We are together. That's it. We do more papers with China than we do with Canada. Well, Canada's got a smaller population. We do more than we do with Britain, which has a long historical tradition. Again, some of this is because China's big and there's lots of people, but we are each other's best partners. And then third, and very important for people in higher education, is we are China's best partner. This is the place mostly they want to come. The Chinese scientists and students want to come here. They fill our laboratories, the postdocs, any place you look, Chinese students. And on the other side, there's not that many US students who go to China. That had been going up after COVID. There's very little. I'm going to be talking about the two kinds of researchers. One is diaspora researcher. Now that just means someone who is born in mainland China and comes and writes papers with a US address. They are at a US laboratory producing US, quote, papers that are counted as part of the US if you count things by address. And then returnee researchers, and that's people who go back to China after having written a paper in the US. And they can go back and forth, and there's some people who are dual authors, etc. Let me see if I know how to move this down now. No? Which one? This one? Which? Oh, the arrows at the bottom. Oops. No. Oh, it wasn't me. No, it still isn't moved. No. This is weird. No. We got an expert or something. Yeah, it's just one. It's a PDF. Just want to go down. What do you push? Oh, okay. What are you doing? So, you do what?
Right.
You fixed it up, so it's working. Okay.
I'm having trouble tonight. Oh, there we go. Looks like it's working now.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Apologies. Now I want to first convince you that a large fraction of US papers are indeed done by Chinese people, Chinese-born people working in the US. So I hear break up papers by whether it has a China address, and if it's a US paper, whether it has a a China-born person. And it's 20, this is in 2018. It hasn't gone down since, just as an interesting fact. 27% of the papers in the US have Chinese presence in the diaspora. And that is far bigger than the collaborative papers between the two countries. I'll come back to that in a minute. In China, it's the same thing. It's the returnee people from the US who go back to China, and now they're doing their research at a China address, but they have written a paper in the US, which makes them, in my measure, a returnee, and they are it was 38.3% of the papers in China. This is an incredibly powerful activity. It's treat these two kinds of researchers as they're the lifeblood of the US-China collaboration. And again, it far outnumbers the number of people writing collaborative papers, which is the standard way we would measure these things. Second, the papers in the US that have a diaspora author on it tend to be getting better journals, and they get more citations. So by some metrics, these metrics, they are, and you can do all kinds of regressions and whatever it is, et cetera. There's just a new NBER working paper, Aghion and Freeman, which came out last month, that they'll give you details. I'm not going to give any details. And the same thing is true in the China. If they have a US experienced author, a returnee, the papers get more citations and more site scores. We checked whether this is just due to the fact that Americans are more likely to cite Americans, Chinese are more likely to cite Chinese, by looking at the rest of the world cites to the papers. And that also says these are particularly good papers. So we have what looks like a very successful collaboration of people. And, it makes great sense. China in the year 2000 was not very big in science. They get people educated in the US, they go back, and the US makes great use of these wonderful Chinese. Everybody here. Oh, but by the way, my data is solely for the natural and physical sciences. Medical, not social sciences, is much more complicated, and because of some of the issues that Mary first discussed from a U.S. context, and it's true in China too, of course. Finally, I want to just give you some more things to understand how tightly tied we are with China. The collaborative papers have on them an extraordinary number of either diaspora people writing in the US or returnee people writing in China. The number I would go with is 79% of these papers have either one or the other. And if it was 100%, we would say this is a necessary condition. The 79 is close enough. It's really very important. And then the other statistics there. Two, the people who play this role, these diaspora and returnees, their commitment is over their careers. We see it, they're more likely in China to do something at one point in their life with Americans. And diaspora people in the US are more likely to work on Chinese things as well. So this is, our data was for 1 year, 2018, but goes throughout their lives. And then citations. A paper in the US, which has a Chinese born author diaspora paper, is twice as likely to cite a paper in China than some other paper in the US. And the same thing, China papers cite the US papers. Well, if you got a returnee in China, that person is familiar, was probably educated in the US. They certainly worked in the US because they had a US address. And so in the collaboration and in the citation networks, these are like this. These are the biggest partners the US has ever had in its research. And now from Americans, we have to understand, China appears, well, China's not dominating the universe, but they are growing way up, and it's going to continue for a good number more years. They are the #1 producer of papers in the world. Their citations to their papers, again, it's not at the same level as the US, has been going up. We did one calculation I didn't put here, it's in our paper, which is, well, what's the share of citations now of China and the US? So it's the quality, you take, China's lots of more papers than the US, about 50% more now, but their citations are less. You multiply the two things together, it's about the same. But the share of global citations in the next few years is almost certainly going to go up China. So the US is getting a big plus from having this partner in research. And bang. And I use the word decoupling here. I said, because when we were working on this paper, in the spring, we said, oh, well, wait a minute, everybody's yelling about the US and China should break up and we shouldn't be friends and ... So we started taking a look. And I just said here, in diaspora and returnees, we found no evidence that these people were stopping their collaborations. My same people I work with in China, I still work with, and it hasn't declined. We do see and this shows up in Pierre's data in a different way, a decline in joint collaborations. So it's harder to collaborate with a Chinese researcher than it was before. So papers with both addresses falls. It falls much more in in China as a share of all papers than in the US. Well, why? Because US papers are not increasing much. China papers are still growing massively. So in one sense, the US has become less important to China. But we'll see in a minute who China now is collaborating with, where they're not collaborating with the US. And that'll be interesting. Where we do see evidence of this decoupling, this decline of collaborative papers, it is on the margin of scholars and students. And so here we've got data, the share of Chinese international scholars in the US with some comparison to India. And what's going on is the Chinese share has taken a big drop. And here the zero COVID policy was very important. That's very hard for people to zero COVID to move. We will see for the rest of this year how much that goes back up. So, but it took a big drop. And whereas other countries, there was a real cutback of all these international trips have come back, China has not. And so I give the figures for the stock, and then I give you the flow of visas granted. And what you see is we gave twice as many visas basically to India, people to come as research scholars, than we did to China. That's that was international scholars. Now for students, it's very similar. And what I think will be, if there's going to be a decoupling, it's going to be because the US will not be having so many Chinese people coming to the US, becoming the next generation of diaspora workers or diaspora researchers. And I'm almost there. Last one. Good. And then the flip back. Then they won't be going back to China. So it's in it's in the margin of the flows of people that the partnership or relationship is endangered. The last page, the last thing, is if this happens, what is going to be what are the two countries going to do? Well, China, during this period of time when they're producing many papers, there's been a big increase in the share of papers written with Europeans, Japanese, and other people, always going to the West. And I then looked and said, how many were there to Iran and Russia? And it's zippo. There is no increase. So the partner for China, if it's not going to be the US, at least looks on the basis of the behavior of the Chinese research community, is other Western countries. And that's, I would say, fine with this. The US having having this the decline in getting international collaborations, that's where we're looking for some clues. We have increased our things with the EU as well, same as China has. And there's some countries that surprised me, Arabic countries, but there's King Saud University offering giant sums of money and who knows what else for people. And we've seen an increase in India. So I view I'm looking at this not from the political side, but in terms of science here. And if we have a breakup of the US and China, of our relation, the tightest and biggest and most, in my view, successful research collaboration between two countries, okay, China has a choice of going to Russia and Iran, which they won't, and it's Europe, and that's, I think, fine as long as they're dealing with democratic free countries and not villainous countries, et cetera. The US's choice is going to be, and I think you see this in some of our policies, let's get a lot of Indian researchers to come in. That's also not horrible or in any way, shape, or form, but there's going to be some costs of transition as we shift and as China shifts. And we do, talking to the scientists, I don't have a survey to report or things. I would say most American scientists would say we want to keep our relations with China. And I think most Chinese scientists have the same view. So I view this as a situation of the science community saying this works, don't mess with it. And the political community saying, I trust my Chinese colleagues, to the nth and they may not be as cool as the French colleagues, of course, but they're wonderful. But that's not what the political thing is, and that's a thing we all have to think about.
Yep. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Richard. So you really identified how difficult it will be for decoupling, given the fact that it's so tightly knit here in terms of really persons interactions, returnees, diaspora, how important this is, and how this might in the short run maybe still be stable, but in the long term may certainly become a problem here. I also noted this trade diversion here, that maybe Europe could be benefiting and some others, but the question is how good is that for science in total, this diversion here. And then I also noted a decoupling between science and the political here. So that's even if we show how important it is to stay connected, the political discourse is completely different here. But I'm very happy that we also can have the view of Qianlin here, because she really illustrates at a very micro level, all the challenges that also Richard already identified here, how difficult it is for individual Chinese researchers here to come to the US, how attractive it is, other going to Europe as an alternative or not, and how this is viewed in China as well here. So we're very happy to have you here still. And so give your views on this.
Okay. Thank you. I'm happy to be the Chinese colleague who Richard trusted. Thank you so much. And okay, I'm happy to stand here because you cannot imagine how hard I came here a week ago. I transferred from my university to Beijing first, because there's still no direct flight from my hometown Sichuan to US. So I transferred from Chengdu to Beijing one day before my flight, and I fly from Beijing to Doha and stay here for 3 hours, and fly from Doha certainly to New York. But finally, I got a flight from Doha directly to Boston. Okay, so it all took more than 1 day for me to come from China here. But, that is maybe the quickest way, because there's still no direct, too much flight. This is one reason why we are decoupling, because physically we could not be coupled, right? Okay, just a joke. So I might introduce myself. I used to be work with Richard in the past 3 years during the pandemic time, and I came back China last July, and then I am a teacher and also professor in Chinese University, Sichuan University, the hometown of the panda. So besides the research, I also give lectures to students who are our hope of future scientists. So I pay more attention to about their future, about their work, especially in our economic, so-called social science field. But here is some data. I give lectures to undergraduate every year for 2 courses, and 1 lecture to graduate from Chinese students. So I think I have some experience to say. Hey, it doesn't work. Oh, okay. So we called. Hi, guy. Hey, I need your help. So this time is the PowerPoint. It doesn't work. Richard has a PDF. Well. Huh. Okay.
Just needed to.
Okay, thank you. So thank you so much. Okay. Okay. Here I want to show the number of the Chinese mainland international students all around the world according to 2020. You see, this is the whole number who are all still overseas, on board. First one is the United States, but second one is Australia, and the third one is the UK. And the total number is maybe half of the United States non-international Chinese mainland student. And just like Richard said and Philippe said, maybe after the pandemic, because some decoupling policy, our students will transfer to other countries. But from the data, we can see, whoa. Wow. So, yeah, he must be here all the time. What magic? Yeah, okay. We can imagine, okay. After, so imagine if United States keep growing to attractive Chinese, student to come. Yes, of course, but finally, unluckily, this attraction cannot become real because they couldn't come for any reasons. So because under this circumstance, the situation changing. So because of the work. So do you guys imagine which country to be the number one? Okay. Let's go. Oh, okay, here. Good. I have a magic too. So stay here. Stay here, okay? Stay here. Don't leave. Don't leave. Okay. So you can see, yeah, we transferred to Europe, especially to UK. This might be the first time the Chinese mainland international students surpass the United States because the United Kingdom attracted more in last year. And for the academic year, in the past academic year, while China remains the largest source country of foreign students in the United States, that's true, but it decreased very sharply. So another data from the academic year, in the past 5 academic year, the international students who went UK increased very, very, significantly. So this means physically decoupling from the result. The student, they prefer to go to the rest of the US. I'm not sure whether UK or Australia or Canada or France, but the rest of the USA. Well, so more data comes from some maybe sensitive topic, I don't know. First, we talk about the STEAM subject. That means science, technology, and engineering, and mathematics. Wow. So in June 2018, before the pandemic, there have some very strict restriction on these 4 subjects who are always attractive to Chinese students who wants to come to learn a lot about. Just as Richard said, no matter after their study, no matter they go back China or still remain on USA to continue their researchers, these 4 subjects are very attractive. But due to another, former President Trump, how he hates China, I don't know. A special issued to suspend the entry into United States of certain Chinese students and researchers, not only for these 4 subjects, but only for some specific Chinese universities. That means if you had experiments in this university, no matter what subjects you are, even though maybe economics, arts, you can hardly get the visa to come in US. And This is the number just Richard showed to us. The visa students issued to Chinese students decreased nearly half. That means even though you could come, you could get the offer, you couldn't come physically because you don't have the visa. So you can just imagine who ranked the first. Yeah, India. Twice more visa to Indian students than Chinese students. So maybe decoupling with China means coupling with India more. And my experience, okay, yeah, because I give lectures to students, so sometimes they will ask me to write a refer or recommendation letter for them to apply for the outside university. You know, during past 3 years, I write only one letters for one of my students who applied for US university, only one. And the rest of the 13 students, I mean, the 13 letters went to UK, Australia, Singapore, and Hong Kong. That's amazing because before this time, I half and half. Yeah, I already encouraging my students to go abroad, no matter which country you should to look abroad. But before it's half and half. Half of my students went to American university, but during the past 3 years, just one. Oh. So the consequence, I just it's not real. It's just my thinking, maybe too optimistic. But we don't want to be the enemies, but we always want to more collaborate with China and the US. So the last but not the most, I'm still thinking about it, what we could do. So maybe first to add a flight between China and the US. Okay, thank you very much.